Well, welcome to the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. And if you're watching the video version of this, you may notice I have a guest. I don't normally have guests, but I'm trying to change the format a little bit because the Alpha Male 2.0 world is growing. And it's better if you hear some voices that are not mine who have used this material to make their lives better. We'll talk about that in a second. Really quick, if you are watching the YouTube version of this and you want the audio podcast version of this, you should go to alphamale20.com/podcast, and it's on all the usual podcast platforms there. And if you didn't know, I have another podcast called the Sovereign CEO Podcast, where I talk about 5 flags, business, and all that good stuff. And that is at, where is that? calebjones.com. I have too many websites. calebjones.com/podcast, and that's posted at all the usual platforms. Today, I'm talking to Keith, and you're going to find out really quick why I'm talking to Keith, because Keith's pretty fucking awesome. Keith has been following my material for a while, and Keith has completely transformed his life. And matter of fact, Keith, you did this faster than I did in terms of life transformations. You did this a lot faster than I did, so I'm actually jealous in a way. But Keith Elder, he also works in my company now, because guys who really put this stuff into practice and get these things done and elevate their lives, I want to work with those guys. So Keith actually works with us now at Alpha Male 2.0. But Keith, say hi.
Hey, how is everybody? Glad to be here. I appreciate you having me here.
Let's start with where you were, and then let's talk about where you are, because there's a significant difference between those two things. And okay, I might interrupt you as you go, but go ahead.
Sure. The before picture was just the summary was I was married for 20 years. I met my wife when she was 15 and I was 17, very young.
Oh my God, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yes, we grew up together basically, dated for 5 or 6 years, went to college, then got married. We're married for 20 years and divorced in 2013. So that was kind of the before picture. To give you an idea of what I think of, I call them super married. I'm in IT, so I work with a lot of guys just like I was. I was married for so long and in a relationship so long that I almost, except for some childhood memories, don't have many memories of things that happened in my life that did not happen when I was in a relationship with her. So it wasn't like I was just rejecting some things or weren't sure. I had nothing to compare it to. So I was, like I said, I think of it as a conditional beta. When she met me, I was very much alpha, single, 17, I was young, yes, but I was doing what I wanted when I wanted. And then over the years, you become a conditional beta because things just happen, things creep up. Death by 1,000 cuts. Nobody's malicious. She wasn't malicious, but I turned into, the house husband basically, where I was so focused on my kids and her that I really, outside of going to the gym, I didn't have any hobbies at all. Everything I did was focused around them or around the house, things like that.
How many kids do you have and how old are they now?
I have 2 daughters. They're 25 and 22 right now. So
they were born right after, right?
Yeah, it was when a couple of years after we got married. Yeah, a couple of years, 3 years.
A couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so we had a honeymoon period, and my marriage compared to some of the horror stories that I'm sure you've heard and I have too was fantastic. It was not bad. I don't think we had an argument. The only thing we argued about was where they would go to college. This is when they were 3 or 4 years old. So it was a minor argument. We were starting their 529 plans. So my divorce, I don't have any horror stories like that. And that's a little different than some people. I think in a way that made it harder for me to handle when it ended, because there was none of the glaring signs you hear, if somebody's serially cheating or abusing you. Did it end suddenly, or was it a slow progression? A slow progression. I'd say around year 15, I started seeing some signs, but then in hindsight, they're very clear. She was trying to tell me in her own way. She was, she's not an expert at divorce either. And so it started going downhill. There was some infidelity involved, but now, especially after some hindsight, it's a symptom, not a cause.
Correct.
Infidelity for most women,
it's always a symptom.
Yeah, it's not a cause. And so those things were extremely painful to me at the time because I didn't have a reference. I'd been with this person since they were a child, basically, and grew up with them. So there was a little bit of that tied in more than meeting somebody in your 20s or 30s and you're kind of a full-grown adult, already. Right.
So I've mentioned in my content, and you guys have paid attention to me for a long time. You've heard that. And I know, Keith, you know this is true too. Other guys you've talked to. Every guy who gets divorced from a traditional monogamous relationship, divorced, or if you don't get legally married, you move in with her and it's monogamous, a traditional monogamous live-in relationship. I'll wrap it up and call it marriage. Right. Every guy will tell you exactly what Keith told you, exactly what I've said. They will all say, I should have gotten divorced years, not months, not days, years before I got divorced. So Keith just said, correct me if I'm wrong, you lasted 20, and to you, that was like 5 years too long, right?
At least 5 years, yes.
At least 5. Because for me, it was probably 10. About that too. Oh, really? 10.
10.
Oh, I've had guys say 10. I've had guys say 12. I've had guys in like 7-year marriages say it was 4, like half the marriage. So this is really common. And I actually think that your scenario is more common. The horror stories, there's a lot of them. And yeah, I've heard of any variation you can think of, I've heard of. I've talked to guys. But what is more typical is your scenario, and which is similar to mine. I had an event that happened in mine, but it was getting really bad years before. It was a slow progression myself. I think that's more, and my marriage wasn't horrible. It was just there. Like, okay, this is my life and this is what I do, which makes it, you're right, which makes it harder to leave because you're not in this horrible pain. You're just like, well, okay, this person's here and I'm here. And I guess that's how it is.
Yes, yeah. I agree. And the year 10 was about the time, this is a side note, but I started becoming obsessed with looking at sailboats and sailing and doing things on the ocean. And now, as soon as I was single, I dropped that. But it was really just that idea of freedom. I was looking at RVs, sailboats. And when I look back now in my old emails, I see when that started and we started talking about it. And she was like, where's this coming from? We're not 60 years old. We're not ready to tour the country. And I was just grasping at freedom because I was contentedly miserable. It was just the way things were day to day.
That's a good way of saying it. Contentedly miserable. That's a good way of saying it. So
slow. And then, I became acutely miserable in the interim during the separation and divorce. Like a lot of things I think in the past you talked about where there's that learning curve or something so painful when you first started, but it's better, and you've got to take a step back. So that acute miserable phase, I wanted to go back because that was the devil I knew instead of this. I'd never really dated. I mean, I was in a small town in Georgia. And so, dating just didn't exist. Not at 17. I dated a little bit, but it was, it was other children, basically. I hate to put it that way, but it's true. We were very young. So one good story, I can tell you where I was at right after the divorce. I called one of my friends, and my friends tend to be younger than me. I think he was 25 or so, 24. I was 43 in 2013. And I was sitting in a parking lot, and I think it was Lowe's, Home Depot, something. And I called him to ask him, where should I eat? Because it was 5:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, and I could not decide where to eat. I couldn't make the decision because I had two girls. I had two girls I had to go through usually, and they're girls, so they were picky. I had a wife to make sure. She was very picky with her food too. She's very, and still is, very fitness obsessed, but also picky. Usually my friends, my daughter's friends were there. So I might have God help me, I might have a Tahoe full of 8 girls every time on the weekend we went somewhere. And this happened for years, probably 10 years. And my friend was like, what do you like? Go where you want to. And I was like, I don't know. I can't make a decision on where to go because I had never, I mean, in little decisions I had, but a decision like that to just say, what do I want? And that applied in a lot of things, but that was even ridiculous to me. Like, go to Taco Bell. You're going to hurt yourself. Do something. I mean, go to Mexican, Chinese, whatever you want. I could do whatever you want. I was that analysis paralysis. And it was, even looking back at now, my old self, it was so ridiculous. And my friend was like, I don't understand. Just pick somewhere to fucking eat. Just anything. And, because he was dating, and he's a good looking tall guy. So he was dating a lot. He was very, very alpha one, still is alpha one, very much, with all the pros and cons that come along with it. And I was that beta. I just didn't make decisions like that. I liked making decisions based on a lot of factors to make everybody happy. I think a lot of, most guys do. I was very happy when everybody was happy about where we went. And so I was kind of missing out on that. So that's kind of a before of just how lost I was in that. In beta is more than just, there's a certain set of behaviors. It was a mindset that I had. Correct, to not necessarily ask permission, but to always include everybody else and not to be my own. I can't remember the guy's name now off the top of my head, where he says you need to be your own point of focus, your own starting point. It always starts from you outward. Well, mine started with other people and then ended up with me because you know what? I can eat anywhere. So why would I pick what I wanted first? Yes, right. Exactly.
Classic.
And you're so trapped in it like I was that I didn't even know until about middle ways, maybe near the end of 2013, I stumbled across you somehow. I can't remember if I was, some PUA, MGTOW, Red Pill, something. I think it probably the Red Pill group, something. Your name came up. Somebody shit on you basically as, you had your own thing. I think you went through all that where people were aggravated because you made money off something. And I think that may be how I ran across it. And I was like, hey, I'll go read this guy. And it was like another world had opened to me. I didn't know you could qualify people in relationships. I mean, you just took what you could get and you did the best you could. That's one of the biggest things that I took from all your reading is
really quick. I'm going to pause you really second so you guys listening. Those of you who have online businesses, that is a perfect and clear example of how haters make you money, which I've talked about in the past. So if you get people crapping on you or insulting you or talking trash about you, that's a good thing. These people are marketing your services for you. Keith is standing here today and his life has changed because someone was talking about how horrible I was or I was a liar or whatever. But anyway, just want to throw that out there. But go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, and your blog was super clear and you invited discussion on everything. And that was important to me. And we were the same age, roughly the same age. So I wasn't coming from a guy who was 21 that had got a foot-long cigar and some sunglasses on, and he said, hey, I'm an alpha male. I wasn't really interested in the alpha male. That's why I'm so interested in post-relationship divorce coaching is because my mindset was just not in a place where I could go read a 22-year-old, 24-year-old alpha male and attack the world. I was not ready to attack the world. I mean, I needed to do a lot of work in my personal life before I could even date, really.
Yeah, few men can after a divorce. I couldn't. I've told guys it takes about a year to get back to some kind of equilibrium after a divorce or a big breakup that's lasted a relationship that lasted many years. That's normal. Took me at least a year.
Yeah, it was at least it was a year before I was stable, I would say, mentally all the time. And then it was honestly many years before, because again, I have childhood almost memories of somebody that even now, when I think of everything I did in my late teens and 20s, it's still a lot of that. So I'm good with it now, but it took a long, long time. Those super long relationships like that are extremely difficult if you have all those memories.
You were 40. So when you got divorced, you were 43?
43, right. 2013.
43. Okay. And you've been married 20 years, like 24 years or 20?
20 years and dated about 5 years before that.
Got it. So you were together with her for like a quarter of a century.
Yeah, many, many years. All through high school, college, everything.
Yeah.
So it was a typical, that doesn't happen as much anymore. The high school sweetheart, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of good to that too. But when it ends, it is terrible. And now she did the typical female thing, which is not saying that in a negative way, where she immediately monkey branched and found somebody else and got remarried. And they're very happy now, I think. Yeah. But she had moved on years before I did. I moved on when the divorce started, but she moved on like a lot of people. She knew it was over probably 2 or 3 years before, and she went through the grieving process, probably privately, and was ready to start something new and move to another phase. Whereas I was caught, deer in the headlights. Yeah. Like what is
again, very typical.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And it's always, not always. Statistically, it is usually the woman throws the guy's shocked. And the woman's, just like you said, the woman's done for a year or two or longer. Again, your divorce and your situation is very statistically normal.
Yes. And when I would go to the red pill sites and look at, it's like I was reading my story over and over and over.
Yeah.
When it was crazy. Or dead bedrooms or something, not the extreme ones, but some of those, it was it was because people are people, and females and males, interact a certain way, especially in certain cultures. And I just read my own story over, and that was so helpful to know that somebody else had went through it. And I don't think even now there's really anything that I could have changed necessarily, because it was systemic. It wasn't like there was one thing that I needed to change and there was one thing she needed to change. It was just, inevitable, basically.
It's human biology. Yeah.
Right. And so
at what point did you start making positive changes? Let's start with your woman life first. When did you start making the changes, and what changes did you make post-divorce?
Okay, so I can start with January 2013. We decided that I read a book. I think it was called The Mindful Attraction Plan. It's right before I found your stuff. And it had a thing called the Male Action Plan inside of it. And it was basically advertised, I think I saw it on Reddit, as within 6 months, your relationship will be better or you'll be divorced. Well, in 6 months, I had moved out and was preparing for divorce because I had set little boundaries, started taking proactive actions.
Was that Apple K?
It is. That's who it is. Yes.
Okay. I know that.
I wasn't sure how to. Yeah, and it's a great book. It's very it straddles the fence, a little purple pillish kind of sometimes.
It does. Definitely.
But it teaches you to set boundaries. And when I started setting boundaries, and the boundaries were crazy, like laundry or something, I don't know, something so mundane, it blew up because the boundaries weren't there before. And essentially I had changed the game. And so I moved out into 2013. I had already found your stuff. I was getting better. I kind of had the setup going with the children going back and forth. I was living on my own. I had a good job still. My job didn't change. So, if financial hardship at that time would have just been, I just don't know how some guys can handle it when their finances are so bad and they're living in poverty. I talked to a guy one time for a long time on Facebook. He was living in his car while he's paying child support and alimony.
Oh my God. I've heard those stories too.
It was just, one thing on top of another. And then his kids can't visit him. He lives in a car. And then, from the judge's viewpoint, look, you're living in a car. You're not even trying, so it's just terrible. So I went out and I immediately, I kind of struggled along with some of the things that because I was reading your stuff. And I think I told you this story in the focus class. Got your book. It was like guaranteed get to sex faster. It was one of those first books you put out. And it was talking about the different types of first dates there were. And you just kind of advertised it a little bit and you teased it. And I thought $50 for a book, fuck that. I like Caleb's stuff, or Black Dragon then. But I'm not paying $50. Well, whatever. I paid the $50. And within a month of me dating, probably 2 weeks, I'd saved the $50 already. And it was amazing. I could go to a park. I could have coffee. I'm a very active, outdoors guy, way more even now than then. But even then, I wanted to go do something, not just sit across from somebody. It's sad to say this is very a Southern thing, but my first few dates, I took people to Red Lobster. Oh, gosh, so terrible. It's like something. Well,
that's what everyone does. That's the norm. That's the norm in a lot of places. I mean, shit.
Gosh, it's so. But you know what? Those didn't work. I mean, they were fine. They were traditional dates and everything. But sitting across from somebody and discussing with a stranger when I didn't know how to really talk, but hey, going out for a walk, going on a coffee, that was one of the life-changing books because I think it was like How to Get to Sex Faster. And, it was a catchy title, but it was true because it was how to get there easier too. Like you give out, some effort and they put in some effort, you meet in the middle, and then it just worked. So from about 2013 to end to middle of 2015 or so, I intensely dated. I was sleeping sometimes on the floor in my office and my boss would come in there and say, "You're too old for this. You're too old to take naps at lunch under the desk," because I was every night. I was doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu probably 3 nights a week. And the other 4 nights I was going on dates, and I might go on a date after class too. So, I was physically running hard. My job was pretty difficult mentally. And then I was going on dates and before dates wasn't with the same person. It was different. And I took, I would usually do twice a week and then I would go to once a week after a while. So I kind of had that system going there. Yep. And it prolonged a lot of those relationships, just like you said, Al. And it was very enjoyable. That is exactly what I needed at the time because a story from afterward, you mentioned you wanted that. So I went to a local beach here to St. Simon's in Georgia. And I went there with a girl. I think she was probably 22, 23 at the time. I'm 44 by then.
Mm-hmm.
And so
half your age.
Yeah.
Good.
She was around there. We went to the beach and I was already planning things out because that's what I did. I planned things out, made sure everybody's having a good time, made sure my kids are having a good time. And so I was doing that a little bit with her, even though she didn't know it. We go to the beach. We're out on the beach there, what little there is. And there were some storm clouds coming. And I guess she saw in my expression, I was a little worried because that threw all my plans out. Like, well, what are we going to do if it rains? And that's where I was still a little bit. And she's like, Keith, what are you doing? Why are you so upset? And I was like, well, it might rain. And she was like, so what's the big deal with it raining? And I was like, well, yeah, I had all these plans and I'm not sure what we should do. And she was like, well, why don't we just go to the hotel room and fuck all weekend? And I was just
You're like, what? Women like sex too?
Speechless. I mean, she laughed. She still laughs about it when I talk to her because it was my expression was, you can do that? And somebody would want to do that. Like want to do it more than me. Yes. And there was no baggage and she was just free and open. And I needed somebody who just liked me to just be there. She didn't need money. She didn't know my kids. She didn't know anything but what I presented to her. And that was very helpful to me. I think long term.
Did you forget? Because I've talked about this, guys who are in a monogamous relationship for a long time forget that they're attractive to women. I did.
Yes.
They completely forget. And so when they get divorced, they go, oh my God, I'm screwed. No one will ever have sex with me. I'm not attracted. No one likes me. I've been with this one person forever. So did you have that same experience?
I did. And I kind of, over the time and when I was married, made myself a little invisible to women also. I had my little button-up shirt and my khaki pants and my brown loafers in the office. And that was kind of what I wore on the weekends. So I was semi-invisible. So it was kind of self-reinforcing because I didn't get a lot of that either. But now, but as soon as the divorce, I went on some websites and looked up, this is way before I kind of have a system now of dressing. But, I bought some clothes that fit and they were painful. I didn't like it. The jeans were too tight. The shirts were too tight. The blazers, I couldn't move my shoulders properly.
Oh, I remember this too. Yeah.
So wrong. But the reactions of just going to a grocery store and it happened before a date and seeing people look again and again at you and even guys just noticing you was eye-opening. And it was a little hard at first because I felt like I was peacocking, like I'm mystery out there, but really I was just dressed nicely, but I had underdressed for so long. So I definitely had that experience. I remember my ex-wife.
That's probably why you were so surprised the first time a woman said, let's just go have sex. What's the problem?
Yes.
Like,
and she was so raw about it too. She was like, let's go now, and just forget the beach, forget eating out. We'll order in. We can just whatever. And so,
Now, let me ask you this question because I know some guys will be thinking this. Was she a hooker? Were you paying her?
Absolutely not.
Was she a sugar baby? Were you paying her?
No. In fact,
no. Thank you.
It was the opposite of that. She went out of her way too to make sure she paid half because she wanted to make that impression that since she was so much younger, she didn't want that impression at all to come about.
Perfect.
And so. Yeah, because I was a little worried about that too, because I had never really dated like that. And so, I've never ran across, well, I'm very strict about it now anyway, but I've never ran across that where somebody, basically wanted my money in the short term, at least. I feel there's probably some people looking long term to get married, possibly that are looking at that, but that's human nature. But yeah, in that situation, what I was going to say is my ex-wife actually made a joke while we were going through our separation because I'm a big reader. I love to read, and she was like, "You could probably find your next wife, or girlfriend at the library." And some of the librarians were not people that I would consider dating, and that it hurt my feelings but she wasn't being malicious. I don't think she could think of anywhere either. Like, cause I didn't go anywhere. Where would I find somebody? And, and so, so that's the difference there. I mean, I went on many, many dates and trips like that. And usually I was pretty rigid at first about splitting the bills on everything. And then I kind of relaxed because it's just not a big deal. Sometimes, I'll pay for things on a trip. Sometimes the person I'm with, it just hasn't been a big deal. Like I think, especially the MGTOW guys, a lot of times will really emphasize you're being, financially raped even when you're dating. And I just haven't found, if I go on a coffee date or a walk and then somebody comes to my house on the second date, I don't know how much more it can get equal than that. I mean, and that's typically what happens in my world and the guys I've seen that don't insist on paying for everything.
Well, especially if you follow my advice, you don't do dinner dates for first dates.
Yeah.
If you just go for a walk, or you go to a bar and get a drink, one drink for her, one drink for you, or you go to Starbucks and get juice. I've done a lot of those. Those work great.
Yeah.
That's it.
Everything. And the
Who
last
cares if you're
woman I
paying
dated,
$8?
yeah, and exactly. That's kind of the thing you said years ago about going for a drink. I'm not super comfortable in bars at all, so I tend to avoid that. But I was like, what if you pay $20? Like, I would pay $100 to eat Mexican food with my daughter and all her friends and not even think anything about it. So why am I worried about $12 that somebody took advantage of me?
Right.
It just didn't happen. And so,
and to be fair, we got to stay for the record. You're a higher income guy. The younger guys who make very little money, they may be more sensitive about that. And I remember I was more sensitive about how much money I was spending 15 years ago. And I made a lot less money than I make now. But the point is valid. Correct. What difference does it make? Who cares?
Well, and even now, I tend to date women over 40. That's my preference now. And the last MLTR, to use your terminology, that I had, high-end one, she laughs because she's like, I think it was 6 months before we went out to eat together because we kayak, we paddleboard. She would come and spend the night at my place. I'd spend the night at her place.
Great.
We would, we just, all of a sudden we were like, hey, we should go out and eat one night. And she's like, I think it's been 3 or 4 months since I met you, before we really spent any type of money that wasn't just, going out and having fun, just doing things together. And that was a big mindset change. It took me a couple of years to get that mindset fully down, though, where I could kind of relax about it, because I was insistent. I felt, at least spiritually and mentally, everything sucked out of me during my marriage near the end. Like it does everybody. It just empties you out. And I was insistent that was not going to happen again. That was one way I could control it, is by not being taken advantage of that way. So, after a while, I relaxed a little bit. But that's a very difference between me sitting in a parking lot trying to decide where to eat. I can't even decide what food I want. And being on a vacation where somebody is insistent, just because it happened to come up, that we should go have sex. As long as we wanted. And then that was it. That was the fun vacation. We came home from the vacation and she was like, I had a great time, and that was nice too, to be told thank you. Like, thank you for having sex with me all weekend. Who could imagine a woman saying that when I was married?
It's like living on another planet after you've been married for so long. I remember having those thoughts. Today, it's a normal part of my life, and yours too.
Yes.
But back, I remember thinking, I'm in another world. Literally, I'm on another planet. And
women go through it too.
Something else.
Post-divorce, they often go 6 months or a year, contra some of what people read, the extreme situations, because they have kids. They have a lot of things going on with work. They're reorganizing their life. It may have been 6 months or a year since they've even been out with anybody. So when you finally get together and you get physical, but they are thankful, just like you're thankful. I mean, they are probably more thankful sometimes, just because you're a good guy. They can have this intimate relationship that, without all the baggage too, they feel the same way a lot of times.
Some of the horniest women I have been with, who were the most excited to have sex, there were a lot of the younger ones, but also the ones you just described. I was the first guy after the divorce, and the divorce was a year or two ago.
Right, I agree.
So it's like they can't wait. I mean, I had women, they couldn't take their clothes off fast enough.
And they're nervous.
So excited.
You can tell, like a lot of things you read talk about women, 100 sex partners, 200. Sure, that happens. But I found the post-40 group, in the 20s, I think a lot of those girls do have dozens and dozens, possibly hundreds of partners, sometimes, not always. But post-40, you might find somebody with an N of one, their ex-husband. And that's all. And
I've been with women like that, where I was just literally the second guy over 40.
And I've had women so nervous, they were having a hard time speaking once it finally got to that point. They were nervous because they'd only had sex with maybe one person, or maybe two, one back when they were very young. And they were just as nervous or more than me. And they wanted to go well just as much as you do. And so that was very nice. It wasn't like, these experienced women were coming in and they're older, but they're not necessarily super experienced with doing that with strangers either. They had to be super careful too. And they're in your place a lot of times. They're very uncomfortable. And that's why I go out of my way, like a lot of people do, to make sure they're comfortable. I have a certain thing I do on second dates that makes them very, very comfortable to be around me, because they're in a strange place with a strange guy.
It's critical.
It's not, and that there's a draw to that for them, but there's also, they can be scared too in the moment. And I've never had a problem with it though. They just, it was easy. Enough.
So you're 9 years by my math into this lifestyle now.
Yes.
Maybe you're coming on your 10th year anniversary soon. If you were to compare your life now on the overall, your income too, I mean, I know you're location dependent now. You've made a lot of changes. Your life now versus your life, let's go back 15 years where you were still married. What are the biggest differences other than the obvious ones of you're having sex and your relationships are good and they're the way you want them and you're more free? And what are the biggest differences to you?
So, you really cover it, but overall, it's just that sense of freedom now. That's one of the big things. I know we talked about it in your focus class, that you were obsessed with being free, and I have freedom to do anything I want anytime. But more than that, I have the ability to take advantage of that freedom. There was it was actually a MGTOW video, but the guy was really clear. He was like, the first couple of years after you're out of a relationship, you have freedom from all the nagging, freedom from being tied down, freedom from all the baggage. But at some point you had to transition to freedom too. Now I had the freedom to go anywhere, the freedom to eat what I want, the freedom to enjoy my relationships. I've just recently moved to Central Florida. So I have the freedom to do anything, anytime, anywhere I want to. And overall, that impacts me mentally, and it shows physically. I'm in much better shape, even though I was pretty good in shape back then, with the normal, I'm 10 years older than I was then. That freedom just can't be overstated, where you're past the sadness, you're past all that anguish that you had. And there's a lot of anguish in the marriage too. You just, like I said, you're miserably contentedly miserable. And when you're done with that and you're not miserable at all of a sudden, you get up in the morning and you describe it. I'm not quite as extreme as that. I don't jump out of bed in the morning, eager to attack the day, but I don't get up dreading like I used to sometimes because my whole day was planned.
Yeah.
And
I want to circle back to something you said really quick. You buzzed past this. I think it's really important. Correct me if I'm wrong. You consider yourself in better physical shape today than 10 years ago?
I do, very much.
Because I do. I consider that myself.
Yes, I've heard you talk about it. I was always into lifting weights, outdoor stuff, but just something about being married. My testosterone was low when I finally got it checked. It's a common story, like you've talked about. It was 220 out of 1,000, where it should be. And the first doctor and the second one I went to refused to hey, here's all the symptoms that you could do. Things all that could bad if you're on testosterone. And I was like, I had a big argument, actually. It's kind of, the doctor remembers me still, where I was like, you have all these fat asses out there getting insulin. And when they're non-compliant, you will give them more insulin. But here's a guy who's been your patient for 10 years, who's trying everything. I mean, I'm having sex with the hottest women I can find. I'm single. I'm lifting weights now. I'm doing all this stuff. And yet it's still not coming together. And all those things were worse when I was married because I was, locked down more. And so finally I found, somebody, and I've experimented with other doctors, doing those types of things. But yeah, I just much better physical shape and able to take advantage of it more too. I'm, like I said, I'm in Central Florida. I'd never heard of pickleball. I know that sounds like a sport that 80-year-olds play, and it is a sport that 80-year-olds play, but there's people from 20 out to 80 out here, and I can just go. And if I want to get good at pickleball or tennis now again, I can go every night of the week. I do my mobility. I lift weights. I do all that stuff here at my house. You can probably see my pull-up bar and everything is in the background. I do all that. And I can work it around my life now. I have much more time to take advantage of the things that I like to do. So I think it would be hard to be single like it is for some guys if you just weren't interested in life. Like some people just don't have a lot of passions or hobbies. They just don't have, one example is a mission, but even just the day-to-day, they don't have any sports. They don't really like to do any kind of recreational activities. And I think being single would be difficult for a guy like that because you have a lot of time to fill, which is very exciting to me. But I think you have to find those things. I've seen women go through it a lot when they go older. My mom did to some degree. Once the kids were grown, she had a difficult time adjusting because everything was for the kids and everything's going to be for the grandkids. And they'd lose their self a little bit, just like you do as a man in the marriage. You lose yourself. You don't really know. Like then I'd never been hiking, really alone easily. I always went with a group, even though it wasn't my wife. She wasn't a big hiker. But I've been on multiple vacations now where I go hike in North Georgia mountains by myself. And they're great. They're just great because I'm not sad the whole time. Like I'm not alone. That quote from Heat, I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. It's very true. Now, I get lonely sometimes. There's always going to be a little bit of that in anybody's life. But I'm not walking around sad all the time. So I think that's the biggest
I was the
thing.
loneliest I had ever felt in my entire life when I was monogamously married.
Near the end,
That's the
that was
last
true
time
for me.
I remember feeling lonely is when I was married in a monogamous marriage. That's when I was lonely.
Well,
I don't know if other people feel that way, but that's how I felt.
Yeah, that. And then when I moved to Central Florida this time, I don't know anybody here. Nobody. I started over from scratch. I'm only a few hours from my family, but still, I don't know anybody. So I felt tinges of that again, but it was nothing like that last year being married, where I was so alone that I couldn't talk to the person who was right there because they were kind of the enemy. I couldn't talk to her family, couldn't really talk to my family because I'm very private. I didn't want to involve everybody. You have to act a certain way in front of your children, and things like that. So now, when I was lonely here, I went out and did things. I started doing things. I started dating, down here. I started going and doing things. I started paddleboarding. I'll meet people over time. That's not really a problem. And I'm very introverted like you. I don't need many people. And so I don't want many people necessarily all up in my business, in my life. So, but yes, nothing like that last year being married. That Robin Williams quote where, the worst thing isn't being alone, it's being with people who make you feel alone is so true. Because, when everything is tied up into another person and they withdraw that maliciously or not, then you have, you had to rediscover your own self and how you, express yourself in relation to the world, going out and doing things. And now it's funny talking about grooming and dressing. I'm a very casual guy. I wear casual clothes, but I get looks all the time now. I look exactly the same, Caleb, as I did 10 years ago. I'm just 10 years older, but I just apparently have a different presence. I look differently. I walk differently. I just look at people now.
Absolutely.
If I find somebody attractive, I look at them. Because
women in particular are sensitive to that
yes.
feel and that vibe more so than men are, way more so than men are.
Yep.
Correct.
And again, wearing things that fit. You can wear, what I've got on now. You can wear, whatever, but they fit and you look decent and you act like you're happy. They're very sensitive to that. All women, married, not, doesn't matter. Even young girls all the way down to 13, 14, 15. That's just biologically, they're just drawn to people who look nice and dress nicely. And they're, either father figures or they're just good, they're good looking. Almost nothing to do with their facial appearance or anything, just the way they project. You talked a lot about that when you first started dating, where you were much more overweight than now, but it didn't matter because you can overcome that as a guy. If you're a woman, you have a much harder time with that. She's got a great personality.
That's a whole different topic. I know.
Yes.
I've talked to her about this, including my own daughter. It's harder when you're, that's right. We're men are lucky in that respect. There's a lot going on the internet right now, how men are not as lucky, but there actually is a lot of benefits being a guy, a lot.
Because you can change everything about being a guy. If you're a woman, maybe some makeup and lose that's about all you got. And you really didn't change anything because you kind of just covered it up. But a guy, you can change everything about yourself. I mean, you can start standing straight and looking everybody that you meet in the eye, and your life will just change for little minor things like that, as difficult as they are to implement. And that's the thing about post-divorce. It's, your advice of, and I agree with it mostly. Tom Torero, I think we both liked him. Just do something, start dating, get out there and do things. I think is a little bit overstated for the post-divorce guy because he has so much stuff he has to pick up and kind of work on himself. And I don't like the general, I'm going to work on myself for the next year before I start dating. That's bullshit. Generally, it's bullshit. They're just putting off, they're scared. But, for a post-divorce guy or a very long relationship, like a live-in relationship, they have no clue where to even start. So they do need to work on themselves. They need to get themselves right. They need to get their children's situation right. They need to set up a new environment and make it the way they want it to be. And, get their diet
Let's end with that, actually. So what advice would you give the guy? Because you guys know my advice, but, or a lot of you do. The guy who just went through a breakup or is going through a breakup right now, probably more likely just went through a breakup where you were living with someone for many years, living with a woman, married or not, doesn't matter. And now you're on your own. What would you tell him in terms of his first and second priorities now?
So first priority, and it's kind of a broad area, is mindset. I mean, it just is. If you're young and you're 22, testosterone and horniness will get you through everything. You don't care, but if you're 40, 45, 35 even, or 50 or older like I am, it's not going to get you through it. You're going to want to hole up in the house. because it's comfortable. Don't do that.
Right.
There's a book called The Tools by Phil Stutz, which was a great help to me, because they were disgusted by how guys would go to a therapist and they would tell them, oh, go back to your childhood. Guys don't want that. I want some type of exercise I can do now, and it contains a bunch of them. So that's a book I would recommend. But the big thing is to get out. Get out. Your mindset, the opposite of depression for guys is doing something. Anything.
Correct. Taking action. Absolutely correct.
It's so hard to be depressed.
Move.
You just do something. And women have a very different way, to handle it. But for men, do something. Be that creeper if you have to. Go up and talk to women. Do something. That's a big step. I probably wouldn't recommend that. But just get out and join a group. Do something, start getting out, get your mindset right, because you're on your own again. It's not you. You don't have to answer to anybody, but you've got to take advantage of that freedom before you can figure out your freedom to do what you want to do. So that would be one. Yeah. Second thing I'm sure you would agree with in general is most guys right after their relationships, their sleep is shit. I mean, it is utter shit. Now, and that's a huge subject too. If you get your sleep right, you're really doing everything else right.
Oh my God. I've been screaming that for 15 years. Yes.
I would look at that. And one of the big things, I've got the Aura ring. I think you've got an Aura ring now too. Yes. I'm a slave to this. When I get up in the morning and I've got a 96, I feel good. But I really do feel good because, everything is right. I would recommend if money is not an issue to buy something like this. But either way, start looking at your sleep. Start getting that 8 hours. I know that's one of your daily minimums when we did the focus class. And those kind of go together. Once you get your mindset right and you're out doing stuff, if you sit inside all day and at night you have, 3 Jack and Cokes before you go to bed, your mindset's terrible. You never got out, not including the alcohol, of course. And then you just don't sleep well because you didn't do anything. And you
can see on the Aura ring, readout, you can see your resting heart rate and how high it is.
Yes.
By the way, you'll want it to be high, guys. How high it is when you eat that garbage right before bed versus if you eat healthy before, don't eat at all. And it's nice and low all night. And your recovery rating is above 90. Yes.
And I love a good bourbon every once in a while, but this Aura ring says that I really don't like it. I like it, but not really. So it's amazing how much that will screw you up. Alcohol obviously is a drug. But, and sometimes it's worth it. But the first thing would be your mindset. Just, you got to do something. Get out, be depressed outside. Go be in a park and be depressed. Go walk around a mall and be depressed.
Right.
Go fix a car, do something physical. Right. And yes, you can be depressed doing that. It doesn't have to involve women. In fact, I'd probably say it doesn't need to involve women when you're first post-divorce. Because you're
right off the boat. Yeah, correct.
Because what's going to happen is if you're going to meet a woman like soon and you're going to think she's the best thing ever. And she may not be. Yes, exactly. Very bad because you're in a hole and you haven't stopped digging yet. But when you get out, you start doing things, you change your mindset. Maybe you do something like that from that book. And then you come home and all of a sudden, it's 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, and you go to bed because you're tired, you start sleeping better. And then my sleep was screwed up for the first 6 months or so. And once I got that right, it's like everything else became better too. My sleep got better. My mindset got better. They started feeding back and forth into each other. I started going out and doing things. And eventually I started dating, which was, kind of that third leg there. But even more than sleep is mindset. Just going out and doing something. Agreed. Don't sit at home, especially this work from home culture now. I mean, I work from home. You can literally sit in front of a computer for 16 or 18 hours and turn around and walk to the bedroom. And then say, I don't sleep well, and then I don't have any energy. Well,
I wonder why.
There's no way to break out of it without doing something. Even if you feel bad, do something. You don't have to be a big sports guy. I did jujitsu. There's nothing like big fat rednecks sitting on top of you and trying to choke you to make you not think about your divorce, and that was great for me at the time. That's what I needed. That was my meditation basically. But that was just me. I like doing that kind of stuff, but I would go paddleboarding by myself and I'd be sad. I mean, I'd be alone out there on the water by myself a lot of times and I would feel bad and I would go through things, but it wasn't the same as sitting at home and feeling bad. Because then I'm sitting at home feeling bad.
And the more important thing is you didn't feel bad forever. You got out of that much faster because you were moving.
And I did
because you were taking action, doing something. Right.
Yes. Yep. And so taking action is a big thing. Tom Torreira was huge on that. You just go talk to a girl. That was his, thing. But in a more general sense, just do something. Don't order your groceries now from DoorDash. Go to the grocery store. Surround yourself with people. Maybe eat at restaurants. I don't really include that quite as much. If you like bars, maybe go to bars. Don't let that get out of control. That's a big problem, that you could let that get out of control. But just get out and do things, and then your sleep will be better. And in 6 months, you'll be in such a better place too. From that you can kind of get the diet, the exercise, the girls. You can kind of add on to the other things that you talk
add
about
on pieces
a lot.
as you go. Right.
Yes.
Right.
A little bit different than a young guy that just jumps straight into dating. He's in good shape. I mean, he eats Taco Bell and McDonald's and he's still in good shape. That's different when you're 45.
Yeah. Keith, it's been great, brother.
Yep,
we're going to have to do this again. We'll have to have you on again.
Absolutely.
So 2 things before you leave for you guys listening or watching, depending on how you're consuming this podcast. If you want to work with Keith as a coach, you saw how great he is. He's hardcore at this stuff. He's one of the best examples I know of these things. We'll have a link below in the YouTube video of this or wherever you're watching this, where you can check him out. And then also something I can't really give a lot of data on yet, but Keith is working on, Keith and a few other people, including myself. We have something for you guys who are older, and I consider older. I don't know, Keith, if you consider this older, 35 or older. That's what I consider older. Okay.
Same.
You guys who are 35 and older, who have just gotten out of something like a divorce or a long-term monogamous relationship, how to get your life straight right after that, because that is a lot of you in my audience, a lot of you younger guys. That's great. And even maybe some of you somewhat younger guys, maybe early 30s, where you've been in a long-term monogamous relationship, living with someone for a long time, and you've just broken up or you're going through a breakup now or divorce, what have you, and you're lost, because that's where I was, that's where Keith was. And you're looking at 2 guys who completely turned that around in a relatively short period of time and live a life that is a fantasy life. We have something coming soon. Can't talk about it yet, but it's coming soon. But thank you, Keith. Any parting words before we go? It's been great.
No, I appreciate you having me. It was great to talk to you again. I like to talk about this stuff and give back a little for what the things that, I've learned from you too.
Cool. If you guys like Keith, let me know. We'll certainly have him on again because this has been great. Cool. All right. I will see you guys next week. Keith, thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.